Okay, so today we're going to talk about a bit about the AngularJS. I don't want to put up too much heavy-duty content so that to avoid people from falling asleep because it's Monday. But basically, AngularJS, if you guys have not heard about it before, AngularJS is kind of like MVC framework, but it's MVC in the browser. Okay, and if you're familiar with the MVVM pattern, model view model, is from Microsoft. So so it basically allows you to have your small application in the browser itself, including navigation, saving your states if you want, with the help of local storage. Of course, that has nothing to do with the AngularJS, but basically it maintains your states and it allows you to transmit to the server in such a way that your communication to the back end is only about data and it's not about behavior. You can put your behavior in the browser itself. And AngularJS is not the first one who has created this. When a couple of years ago, I'm not sure whether you guys know Adobe Spry, Spry, Spry. So Adobe Spry in 2006, that was like 4 years before this MVVM started. It started with, I think, Knockout.js, and then Backbone a couple of months later, and then Backbones, and then Ember.js, and then I think those are the famous ones, and then finally AngularJS. And AngularJS is not when they first came out also, it was not designed for the web, actually. You can Google it yourself. But so that is a bit of context about the AngularJS. And this presentation is concise, just to give you, to trigger, to kindle your interest about AngularJS. I don't think we need to do much about that because we are already using that, right? AngularJS. Okay, just started. So at the end of the slide, you will not be AngularJS developer because you need at least hands-on. I think you need at least around 60 hours of development time to really appreciate, to get comfortable with it. But the concept is there. You probably can understand it in this session. Why people use AngularJS is there are various reasons. Data bindings, if automatic data bindings, in a short, like in a traditional way, double quote traditional way, especially jQuery way, is always based on the CSS selector model. Before you render everything in the browser, you always have to assume like the DOM is there, and if it's not there, you somehow wait for the DOM to be ready, and then you basically always assume and select some element from the DOM. So AngularJS trying to move away from that a bit. So everything is declarative. That means like you can just specify a tag, and then your code can just be behind the scenes. Like for instance, kind of difficult to say, but let's start with the data binding first. Data binding means that every time when you change your DOM, your code, in this case, obviously is JavaScript, your code is automatically is like notified or is aware of the changes in the DOM without accessing the DOM. Now, I know maybe it's too far-fetched, but that's the concept. And then if your code via view model in this case is $scope. We'll talk about that later a bit. Can access that variable easily without doing much work. So that is automatic binding. It's two-way. Okay, and more you can look for that in Google. So trying to move away from the DOM. Data binding, there are two types of data binding. One is using the mustache or the curly bracket. It looks like mustache, right? So you can use that to specify your objects, and then your object is accessible from the JavaScript. Another way is using the directive style. We'll talk a bit about directive because directive is an advanced concept. Directive syntax, you can specify as part of the HTML tag you can put the attribute data -ng bind equal to some value. The curly braces, you just put the mustache or the curly braces and put your variable name there in the HTML and it will render it.
Is it always double curly bracket?
It is by default double curly bracket. The question is it always double curly bracket? By default, it is, but you can change that. Okay, but normally people do not change it unless there's a conflict. Good question. Okay, so curly brace syntax. Like for instance, my name is. You can put name if you don't have objects, but if you have object, you can refer to object and dot that property. And then automatically it will just handle. Automatically, how? We'll talk about it in the subsequent slides.
You can first define that object?
Yeah, I'll explain that. Oh. This is just to tell you how to explain about the syntax. The next one is the directory syntax. Div is, you can put, I call it annotate. You can put this Angular specific attributes, or you can even define your own elements. In this case, we are not defining any element. We were just using the directive which appear as a HTML tag attribute. In this case, the attribute is data -ng bind to make div populate your variable automatically. So in this case, it's the same syntax as the previous one, but if you do not want to use the curly bracket and you do not want to override that curly bracket, just in case maybe some other framework you already have that. In PHP, maybe, I don't know whether PHP or some other framework that curly bracket means specific thing, and you don't want to override that default behavior, you can use this directive syntax. Okay. The next one is, okay, so this is the simplest AngularJS app. It's like hello world. You start with in HTML5 or beyond, you have to start with doc type. Okay, that's not optional. Of course, you can omit that too, but then it will revert back to the legacy browser, whatever browser implements. But in HTML5 or beyond, you need to put the doc type and then a character set, HTML, and ng app, you can put it anywhere. In this case, when you put ng app at the root, which is HTML, that means you are letting the AngularJS manage the whole HTML as an Angular application. Okay, Angular application means I'm just telling you a bit of advanced topic. In AngularJS, when you look at the HTML DOM, there are two phases. One is compilation phase, another one is a linking phase. Okay, why they do that? For performance reason. Compilation phase is if you look at everything, like whatever that you annotate here, ng app, you can put this ng app in the div also, or even span. Okay, but normally you don't do that because that is the highest level container, ng app, and then after that you can put controller. I'll show it after this. So when you load this HTML, the AngularJS will try to compile everything, trying to replace whatever it could statically. And then in the translation part, which is, they call it linking, like if you have dynamic data, that is a separate part. Okay, that is just a FYI. If you want to know more, you could Google yourself.
Okay, so it looks like title might have an end tag. It's hard to see because it's gray on gray. But paragraph doesn't? Is that?
Do you mean like I'm missing the source tag?
The paragraph doesn't have an end tag.
Oh no.
Oh,
Paragraph, the P, right? Yeah, you're like, probably you need the end tag. Yeah. Good catch. Oh, you don't need the P, P, you need the end tag.
Okay.
Yeah. So in this case, I'm just going to try to demonstrate to you, but in this case, of course, it's useless application, but it is doing something. You look at it try to compile, there's nothing to compile. Try to link, there's no dynamic things to link. So it will just render it. And if you look at my previous slide, I say that the source tag include is omitted in all the slides. So in the header, you still have to include the Angular reference. I'm just not showing it.
I just wasn't sure if this overwrote the syntax in some way, but all right. That makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, so the next slide is about controller. So after you define the ng app, typically you want to put your variables within another what is that container called the controller. Controller is like MVC controller. MVC, the server side MVC. Yeah, model view controller. Controller is like that controller, even though it's more than that. But basically, when you do ng controller in that syntax, there are various syntax too. You can put ng colon controller, but ng hyphen is a HTML5 way. So if you do like that, and in this case it's span, right? So at the end of the span, it's not really visible there, the span. So in that block, it will create a totally its own scope, which is different from the outside. So you can have multiple ng controller inside the ng app. And scope is very tricky if you're not really that keen in JavaScript. Scope is not, we're not talking about block scoping. A scope is function level in JavaScript. If you do not understand, we can take a whole day to talk about that, but you can Google it yourself. So it creates a scope for you.
It's like a local variable.
Yeah. In
Java,
Java is a block scoping. Block means that local is the king. But in JavaScript, right, because it's a function level scoping, that block, even though you put in your let's say your if statement, that thing can be visible outside your if, to make it simple. But you can Google yourself about the difference between block scoping and functional scoping. JavaScript is functional scoping. So that scope is that scope that I'm talking about. Yeah.
So this span is defining a controller.
Yeah. If you annotate like
And
that.
after you do that, you can reference this thing by the name you put.
Yeah, from your JavaScript code. Yeah. So basically, that's the concept. And the view. So the view is like template. In this case, I'm not showing any view. Is the span become your view?
Why every slide in the middle is
team.
huh?
It's a PowerPoint team to people.
Oh,
No. Next.
It's an eye test.
Next.
So he intentionally hides something at that point.
So that you will not fall
Oh,
asleep.
it looks perfectly clear on the side.
Oh, yeah?
So it doesn't look so good.
Okay. So in this case, we're talking about view, right? What is view? Is a template. If you're from Java world, probably velocity template or flea marker or whatever. But when we say view, it's just a piece of code that you tell Angular, this is a piece of code that I want to populate with my own data. Okay, and this is hard coded. I'm just showing that span in this case is your view, but you could also use some other HTML block as your view. Maybe it's not that clear for you, but that's why this is only sneak peek. Okay, behind the scene you can transform anything. Okay.
Yeah.
See, I told you.
Go back to the previous slide.
So you don't get it. Okay.
So is it the same piece of code? Are you saying
It's a controller,
next-
model, and a view.
Which one
so are
you're
you
not too
in
clear?
the view page? Are you saying you define this controller in that block for a view?
No, view is. I'm just trying to fit the MVC model, but in Angular, there's no specific view. There is a concept of template, which is a fragment of HTML that you can change from your Angular app. But I'm just showing you if you really want to force yourself into an MVC model, the view is actually anything inside the HTML, inside the ng app. Okay? So maybe I'm not that clear, but if you can Google yourself about view.
All these slides, they're the same. It's the same piece of code, right?
Yeah, it's a piece of code to simplify things. So I'm just telling you in this context what is view, because there's no view right here. So anything can be a view, as long as you put a what's that? How to say? The proper way to do in Angular style is not to put any ID, and do not for instance in like jQuery style refer to that element by ID. That's not the model to use. I'm not saying you cannot do that, but it's to implement your own things called directive. So we'll come to directive a bit later.
I think when I was looking over AngularJS a little bit, there was something called ng-model to
Yes.
specifically say it's a model. Is that
Yeah, you're right.
that's
That's a good point. The question is, what is maybe ng model? In this case, right, there is no ng model here. Your model is the name, because it's hyphen.
Okay.
If you want to associate, let's say, your input to some other objects, and you want automatic two-way binding, then you can say ng-model equal to that variable name. In this case, name. Yeah. In this case, we are not changing anything. It's basically one way, because if, let's say, you change from your code, it will just show up. It's not two-way. But the ng model, if you put an ng model over there, not span is not input, right? In the input type, then it will be two-way. Without you doing any coding. It's automatic. Automatic means that when we come to the next concept later, scope. So this is a typical, go next please. Typical Angular app, as you see, it has all the scripts, everything, you know. What's that?
You have the ng model.
Yeah. So in this case, like input, like what I mentioned, ng model, normally you want two-way traffic. I mean, you want to from the HTML, if someone change it, it will be visible in your code. The change are visible, and then in your code, if you want to change something, it will be reflected back to the DOM without any refresh. It's not, you don't even need to do F5. It's automatic. It's live. So in this case, you include the Angular dependencies at the line number 5. You have a bit of code that in this case make use of the scope. Scope is the view model. Scope is related only to the controller. Okay. There is another scope which is outside the controller that is always accessible. It's called root scope, $root scope, but it is not recommended to use that. So that's why you don't see any literacy or books or whatever talk too much about that. Then you will be ending up like using globals everywhere. But remember, the scope dot something is a way to go. But after 1.2, right, Angular 1.2, they suggested that the scope should, we'll talk about in the next slide, the controller should be replacing the scope. So controller dot something. Scope is before 1.2. That's why I asked you what version you intend to use. So this is one way, and then name controller is the one that you define over there. That become a controller. It looks like a function, right? But controller can be controller is nothing special. It's just a JavaScript function that somehow it's not shown in these slides. A proper way to do is by defining a module, Angular.module, and pass in the whatever dependencies, and then pass in the function. In this case, the controller. I'm not showing here because this is the simplest one. I didn't know that.
So controller is always JavaScript.
Yeah.
Is it possible to do something else? Or?
No, it's just always a function. It's just that it's different way to there are like 3 ways or 4 ways to define controller. I'm just showing you 1 or 2 here. So this is one way, embedded. It makes life easy, but normally you want to put this controller outside the external JavaScript.js file.
And also this scope. So to make that work, number one, you would have to have an ng app
Yeah,
in your
Yeah.
upper.
yeah. If you ignore that, everything else does not mean anything to the browser. The Angular does not even compile. If you just totally ignore it, that does not even exist. Once you have an ng app, it will try to compile, and then we'll look at the after it's finished, from the start to the end. You look at the internally, you have anything that you need to link against something that we will talk about, the directive. That's a advanced topic. Link, and then it will render finally. And then during that renderation, if you do not try to hide it, like you're using ng cloak, or trying to hide it, you will see that the mustache appearing. So that's a catch.
So if we bring this page up on the browser,
Hmm.
so the very first thing you will see is pre-populate John and Smith,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
That's what it does.
Yeah, it will do that because the ng model, you specify that is the scope, the scope, the variable in the scope that you would like to refer with. Yeah.
And because of the data binding below hello first name last name with the mustache symbol, when you edit those two fields, it will automatically change. You don't have to refresh it. That's what it's
Yes,
doing.
the question is when it is loaded, because first name and last name are referred that after the input. Yes, when you type in the first name, it automatically appear there in the first name. It might not, if your application does not work like that, then there is something that you need to do to disassociate the two-way traffic. Otherwise, it will be two-way traffic automatically. It's not like your traditional when you type and then you hit the submit, then you will save. No, when you type like James, it immediately appear in that line 18 without you doing any refresh. Might not work in all the cases, but they just assume that there is a lot of people will like that without doing any extra coding.
It's even simpler than jQuery command.
Oh yeah, of course. jQuery take probably some tasks. Oh, yeah, in this case, jQuery probably 3 or 4 lines. Depends on how you do it. But in this case, there's 0 line, right? I mean,
It'd be nice for validation checks for auto-complete.
Yeah.
You can check to make sure they're entering the phone number correctly or as they're doing it.
Yeah.
In jQuery, you'd have to wait. You'd have to do something complicated to do that.
You have to do some coding.
Yeah, this would just automatically do some validation checks in real time instead of waiting for a submit.
that's true. And also, if you use the HTML5 a bit, you can put the type to like email or the type to become URL. Then the assuming that it's an HTML5 browser, it will validate it without even submitting. That is not Angular, but HTML5. Yeah. And I remember there are certain things too, like you could put maybe ng change. So every time you type something, you want to do a validation like what you say, then you can do that kind of things using ng change.
Yeah. And you link this to like a SQL statement too, versus bind it, right? Back on the server.
Yeah.
Versus binding it here.
Yeah. And in 1.2 or beyond, all these input are safe. You don't have to clean up the whatever you submit. The cross-site scripting is handled.
1.2 and above?
Yeah, 1.2 and above. 1.2 below, no. Yeah. And next, if no one had any questions, it's a bit ill format. You see, it looks nice here, right? ng controller is optional, just for the sake of the knowledge. But normally you want to put the ng controller because you want to write your business logic in the controller. If let's say you omit that, if you go back to the slides, right, there's no controller. Those curly bracket name everything will be bound to the root.
Can you actually go back?
Yeah. Sure.
Here, right?
Yeah, even here, if you the ng controller, the CTRI, you ignore this, that name will be bound to the $root scope. Okay, it's not in the dollar scope. So if you do scope.name, you will not find it. Okay, but you know, just for the sake of it, normally people would not want to bind anything to root scope. The only good things, if you really want to do it, root scope is visible across all the controllers. You have 10 controllers, and you're, for whatever reason, hopefully you're not lazy, that you want to put in root scope. Yes, that can be done. Okay. Angular expression, like what I say, there are a couple of everything is Angular expression, and created this a while back. What I meant to say is a replace. I don't have R, right? You have this ng-click, ng-source, even src. If you have any Angular expression, it is recommended that you use the ng syntax. Like the ng-click, right? There's an on-click, right? The JavaScript option. If possible, do not use that, because Angular do this compilation linking, and also especially the ng-src. During that compilation, if you are not using ng-source, you use like source, src, to grab your image, it will immediately show up, even before the compilation is done. So it's kind of like not that nice, ugly. But if you use ng-source, I'm just giving one example. There are much more reason more than this, but if you use ng-source, during the compilation, you will hide your images until it is really ready. The linking is done. Okay, so use the corresponding Angular expression if possible. ng-repeat is like you want to do for loop. I ever interviewed someone about this. One way to know whether he really claimed he knows the stuff or not, I always ask the person, how do you do a collection in AngularJS? I was trying to see whether he or she know the ng-repeat. Among like 5 people, maybe one person will tell me ng-repeat. That was like a while back, over a year ago. That's the way that you quickly know that whether this guy, how much exposure he has. Of course, it's not fair to him or her, but ng-repeat is collection. Substring, this is the way you do substring, no magic, you know, just for the sake of the knowledge. That's how you do it. It's like JavaScript. Temporary expression. Yeah. What I meant is temporary expression is, remember I said that AngularJS have 2 phases. When the DOM is loaded, it will have compilation. And then compilation is done. It's only done once. When the DOM is the HTML page is fully rendered, the compilation is done. And then after that, based on anything like ng-repeat or any other thing dynamic, or also if you have your own custom directive. Yeah, explain about directive? Not yet, right? Because that is an advanced concept, advanced topic. So it will do the linking. So during that temporary phase, if all this expression that you have will be visible as a mustache, as a curly bracket. If you don't do anything with it, that will be visible for you. And there are a couple of ways to hide that. If you're a CSS guru, you can always use CSS, but you can use ng-cloak. There's ng-cloak here that you can put there. And then anything that in the div, for instance, will not be visible during that compilation phase. Filter. Okay, this is another interesting thing about AngularJS. Let's say you have an input box, and then when user types something, you want to hide your table. You know, there's like search engine. Whenever it types like autocomplete, you know, whenever you type J, you want to show only all the tables that start with J, and then JA. You want to do some filtering, or you want to format in the input. You have a currency. You want to format in a certain way. You can use filter. And the format of the filter is the mustache thing, the thing, followed by the pipe. Okay, that pipe, that one straight line is once you add that pipe, anything beyond that will be treated by AngularJS as a filter. So in this case, I'm just telling that anything that is I want to show here, just make it uppercase. Okay, and that uppercase is a directive that AngularJS team has created. It's nothing to do with the HTML or anything. So that is really Angular. And you can define all these filter, using the directive yourself. You know, so a bit of like tag lib, right? Except the tag lib is server side. Yeah. Any questions? Almost done. I told you it's only 10 minutes. Dependency injection. Dependency injection is very important in AngularJS. Who is expert in dependency injection? Raise the hand.
Yeah, I know how it works.
No? Oh, but it's not expert. Okay, so I cannot ask you to explain it. Dependency injection basically is if you know what is a strategy design pattern. Have you guys heard about that? Strategy design pattern? It's a superset of that. It basically instead of doing, for instance, instead of doing a new object instantiation yourself, you would like to use the IOC container like Spring to wire up your objects and to instantiate it and to wire it to yourself and inject all the dependencies. Dependency most likely is objects, another object, and inject it into your constructor, and then and you run your application, right? In Spring, you can inject in constructor. You can also inject in the setter methods. Okay, but in JavaScript, we don't have that kind of luxury. So everything is, when you talk about dependency injection, most likely you are talking about injecting the JavaScript function with the parameters that you need during runtime. Why? Because when you want to test your application outside the app, outside the container, you can use similar approach. You can inject different objects. You can inject your mockup object, for instance, easily. Okay, or the different implementation. So dependency injection is built when they designed this guy, Misko. We'll talk about that in future slides, but it's a very funny guy. So he's very good in testing. So that when he designed the AngularJS, he already foresee that. How do I test this application? Okay, so that's why mentality are different from jQuery. Okay, so that is a very important aspect of the dependency injection. And dependency injection mostly are done two ways. One is the Angular module, where you inject all the dependencies when you bootstrap the application. I'm not going to show here. I'm just going to tell you. Another way is services and factory. Service is anything that you want to inject, but you want to return a function. Okay, and factory is the same thing, except the factory return the objects. Why you want to use a service and factory? Do you guys can foresee that? Service and factory. Why you want to use that?
Factory will construct the objects and give it to you, right?
Yeah, because but how about the service? Why do you need service?
As an interface.
No, the service and factory are the same. The main objective is, of course, service. You can create your service to call the REST service, for instance, but need not be. Factory, you can do anything. That the main objective of having service and the factory is to reduce duplicate codes. This is one of the mechanisms that AngularJS proposed to avoid copy and paste JavaScript code. You can instead make your common code and wrap it in the service or factory, and then call that everywhere in your AngularJS. Okay. AngularJS codes are testable since all the dependencies are injected into the module. Module in the case of AngularJS is your main application container. You can actually have multiple modules. Okay, but normally typical application you have only one module with the multiple controllers. But if your application are very big and for some reason you want to dissect your AngularJS into module, you can do that too. And everything is injected. That's why it's testable. And remember, I know some of you are not here. What is a testable code? Can someone tell me what is testable codes? Okay, there's one way. What is testable code?
It is a code that is testable.
Okay, good try. Hey, at least it's still awake. Testable code, in my humble opinion, is a code that you can test easily without much trouble.
And
No?
dependency
Not convinced?
helps. Yeah. And
You're talking
dependency
about
injection
automating
helps.
tests.
No, I'm not talking about that. Testable code is, you're right, testable code. Except that I added a bit, it's easy to test. Why is it easy to test? Because you can replace the parts, everything, easily without changing 50 things. 50 places just to make it testable.
Without doing mock.
Yeah, without doing mock.
Setup.
Mock is not a bad thing. Okay, mock is if there's something that is hindering you from doing your test, and it's not what you're testing, then it's okay to use mock. You understand? You should not be mocking the stuff that you want to test. But if in the process of testing something is blocking you, you can mock that. That is okay. And then changing your code because you cannot test, that is okay too. That is okay. That is according to Ken Beck and Wally Martin Fowler. Some top dogs in software. They say it's okay. TDD. To change your code so that it make it testable is okay. Okay?
And dependency injection helps.
Dependency injection always helps. Even before dependency injection, look at the gang of 4 tonight if you forgot. Look at the strategy design patterns. Okay, now the interesting part, the scope. You see a lot of things about the scope. Scope is the magic things that tie the DOM, the browser stuff, with your code, your AngularJS. $scope, you can put anything. You can even put something else in $, but they just decide to use $scope as a view model. So the view model is actually, if you are coming from Java world, you're lucky that I'm from Java world. You remember the Java beans in the JSP? That is your Java beans. Except the Java bean is server-side. Now scope, you have this scope. If you are a .NET guy, it is the context. Not .NET guy? Okay. So scope. So every time you refer to scope, it is only singleton. Okay. It is there's no separate values of the scope. There's only one scope every time when you bootstrap your code. When you refresh again, of course, it's everything created again. But assuming you do not refresh, like Gmail, you load only once, right? And after that, the scope will be there forever. But scope is, remember, is only related to your controller. In other controller, if you look at a scope dot, let's say you put John in one controller and expect to see in a $scope in some other controller, you will not find it. And there's a way to bridge them together. But that, again, is an advanced concept. I'm not going to talk about that. Okay, anything else? We still have a couple more slides to go. It's only 10 minutes. So, anything else?
Feels like 10 minutes.
It's 10 minutes ago it was.
Feels like only 10 minutes.
How many are? Is there anyone counting this? No? Nobody doing the...
You are so good, no us.
Okay, for the sake of my fan, I was told that I'm good. Okay, so if you don't have any question about this, we can go to the next slide. Data binding, how about the collections? When you do the collections, more than one items, how do you do it? It's more or less the same thing. You have the array or objects array. In this case, food. You have two objects. Oh, by the way, just in case you forgot, curly something in JavaScript, that means that is JavaScript object. Just FYI. Because JavaScript do not have class. It's prototype, but there is another topic of discussion. So in this case, you are saying that you have two objects, mushroom and eggs. So in this UL, unordered list, okay, when you put that data hyphen is optional. Okay, you can put data hyphen if you are really HTML5 guy, because HTML5 one of the spec says that all the attributes you have to start with data hyphen, just to be good citizen of HTML5. So if you want to put that, you can put also. AngularJS will understand that. Okay, there are some other syntax also. ng colon, like what I say. If you are talking about older browser, like you know what browser, don't have to mention that. So in this case, F is the element in food. Food is the collection. And then when automatically when during compilation, the AngularJS will understand that.
So you are hard coding the data here. What if it's some say JSON object you get from the server? How do you
Then you will replace the scope.food with your you probably will do a JSON.pass, the string back, and then as long as it become a JSON object, then you can refer it in your ng repeat. Yeah. Dot something that depends on your structure or your JSON. Depend on the layers, how deep is your thing. But assuming it's only one layer, then similarly you can do like that. Dot description. Okay. Like what I say, this is a convention that maybe is too small. Apologize for that. Well, you can maximize that. You can click the present if you want. Oh, what happened? No. Click again.
It's app.message.
Okay, bigger. So all you can do Control plus to zoom it. So in 1.2, AngularJS 1.2 or above, they seems to, I don't know how to say it. They seems to say to view that $scope is not a good thing. I don't know whether that's correct words or not. So there are another syntax that seems like more popular that they suggest. You can use, instead of put everything in the $scope, you can refer in your controller. I think it's for the maintainability or something, more modularized. I forgot about what's the reason, but this is a better way instead of putting $scope. So instead of $scope.name, you can put the controller dot whatever. $HTTP. Like jQuery, you have $eject .get something, right? So in AngularJS, this $HTTP is you still have to put, when you bootstrap your application, Angular.module, you still have to put that if you are using that. But once you refer to HTTP, right, it automatically appear to you, and you can make use of that to do a get and post. I'm not sure whether there's any other methods, but at least get and post. And the syntax is actually quite the same as probably jQuery. You have some method called success and another one error, and in that you accordingly you do your passing of the JSON or something. I didn't show here. Okay. So promise is an object that is returned immediately, but if you, I don't know how to put this thing, put it in the words, but basically think about the call is by nature is asynchronous. That means you don't have to wait for it. When you call, you make a call to the back end, right? You can immediately return. But the catch is you have to provide a function so that the call, when the call return, it will call your function. And that's one way. Another way is using promise. Promise is when you return, right? You can refer back to that piece of code to get the status or to get the objects. Okay. I didn't have the example here, but basically you can Google yourself to look at the promise. Promise is by nature is a default object that the AngularJS return.
Is that from a different framework?
No. $HTTP.
Promise.
Promise.
Is it part of AngularJS or?
It is by default AngularJS. Yeah. Like for in this case, right? Is you're calling the .get, and you what is that? If it will return you the promise, right? And now how do you refer to that promise? After the .get, right? You see the .then, okay? The .then transparently behind the scene, when you do the .then, right? This piece of code will only execute only when you get the return from the server. Okay, it will not execute until the server returns the data from you. Then you may asking, what's the difference, right? I mean, have you guys know what is pyramid of depth? Pyramid of depth. Pyramid of depth in JavaScript. You notice that some code, if you look at the complicated JavaScript code, asynchronous in nature, where you make a call and then you pass in the function, and then that function has to wait for another thing that you do. So function within function and within function. It's like pyramid, right? Using the promise, you don't have to, you can avoid that pyramid of depth. How? Because you can chain everything together one by one. And this, why? Because there's a promise objects that is behind the scene that is taken care for you by a framework like AngularJS. That's why you can do the .then. And after .then, if you want to put another then, you can do that. That's what I meant by promise. It's a very advanced concept, but I want to talk a bit here to tell you that it's there if you want to use it.
So that will be sequential.
So it will be sequential.
Even though it's an asynchronous.
Even though it's asynchronous call, it's as though that you are programming in a procedural sequential approach. So promise is returned by default to you. Bootstrapping application. Just now, remember I mentioned a lot about Angular.module. So inside if let's say you put your the controller outside the .js file, one of the first line that you want to put is Angular.module. And then you put in this case, my app is the name of the ng app, which is optional. If you don't put the name, okay, if you don't put the name in when you declare your HTML tag, you just put ng app that we did just now, then it will just automatically know that this is the name, okay? And this is assumed that you only have one app. You can put ng app equal to my hyphen app also to associate, to make it more clear, but you don't have to do that. And the second parameter is your dependencies. For instance, if you want to use $HTTP, you put $HTTP inside this array with the square and then the double quote. Okay. Okay, so that's what I meant. The other way to do it is that's more like advanced. That I told you that there are various ways to bootstrap application. For let's say you want to minimize your code also, minimization. If you mess up with your name or something, there are a lot of ways to avoid that also. But you need to use a slightly different syntax. But most people do not come in. That is an advanced topic. So we're not going to talk about that. It's already more than 10 minutes. What is SPA? Anyone knows? Okay. What is single page application?
You never reload the page.
Okay. Good explanation. Single page application is, single page. And typically when you load the application, you load only once. Like Gmail. You can load multiple times, but what's the point, right? You load only once. It will take you like 5 minutes to load if your computer is slow, but that is one good example of single page application. Once you load, you can do anything within the browser, including when you click on it, it navigates, it's called deep linking. Sometimes you see some pound something after the URL. It's actually doing it within the app itself. It's not even communicating out. I see someone is falling asleep. Okay. Where am I? Okay, so that is SPA. Okay. What if you have a legacy application where you click and then it open another window or another tab, or it reload again the whole thing? Does it matter? Can you use that with Angular? Oh, I already give the answer. Sorry, I meant to hide that. It does not matter. You can use that too. The traditional method is just that when you click that and it goes to some other page, unfortunately you have to reload the whole app again. The ng app will be the compilation, linking, everything has to be kicked off again. Okay, so that is the only catch. Because a good SPA is you use navigation feature using the ng route, if you know. ng-route is you can inject that, and then you can define your template or your view, so that every time when you click on some link, instead of reloading or go back, you can just refresh part of your document fragment. Blah blah blah. So
So it actually allows reloading the page if needed.
Typically not the whole thing. That reload the whole thing is a taboo.
Right.
But you can reload part of your DOM or reload something behind the scenes. Like if you have JSON, you want to refresh again. Typically, you will not reload the whole page again. I'm just saying typically.
But
you still can do that.
Okay.
You can do that. I mean, that's why I say, right, in previous slide that whether SPA or otherwise, it's okay. It's up to you. As long as your user does not complain, why do I need to reload again? It's okay. Everything will start from the zero again. That's all. Security issue, since I already overshoot my 10 limits, you can talk. You can look it up yourself. But basically, when you do ng-click all those things, it clean. Make sure that all your parameters, if you put in the get, it's not safe. You will clean it up. Make sure that it is cross-site scripting safe, for instance. Okay, you can check more on that. And that's about it. Any questions? 4:20. Is it? No questions?
That's a great presentation.
Okay.